How did life originate on Earth?
You could ask anybody working on the subject, and you'll get a different answer from all of them. They will be pretty passionately held opinions, and they're opinions grounded in science. But they're still really, at this point, they're opinions, because there's so much stuff to know that all we can ever do is get a kind of a small slice of it, and it's the context which matters. So I can give you my answer. My answer is, from a biologist's point of view, that has been missing from the equation over decades, which is, well, what does life do on Earth? Why is it this way? Why is it made of cells? Why is it made of carbon? Why is it powered by electrical charges on membranes? There's all these interesting questions about cells that if you then look to see, well, is there an environment on Earth, on the early Earth, 4 billion years ago, that kind of matches the requirements of cells? Well, there is one. There's a very obvious one. It's basically created by whenever you have a wet, rocky planet, you get these hydrothermal vents, which generate hydrogen gas in bucket loads and electrical charges on kind of cell-like pores that can drive the kind of chemistry that life does. So it seems so beautiful and so obvious that I've spent the last 10 years or more trying to do experiments. It turns out to be difficult, of course. Everything's more difficult than you ever thought it was going to be. But it looks, I would say, more true rather than less true over that 10-year period. I think I have to take a step back every now and then and think, hang on a minute, where's this going? I'm happy it's going in a sensible direction. And I think then you have these other interesting dilemmas. I mean, I'm often accused of being too focused on life on Earth, too kind of narrow-minded and inward-looking, you might say. I'm talking about carbon, I'm talking about cells, and maybe you or plenty of people can say to me, yeah, but life can be anything. I have no imagination. And maybe they're right. But unless we can say why life here is this way, and if those reasons are fundamental reasons or if they're just trivial reasons, then we can't answer that question. So I think they're fundamental reasons, and I think we need to worry about them.
Yeah, there might be some deep truth to the puzzle here on Earth that will resonate with other puzzles elsewhere, that will, solving this particular puzzle will give us that deeper truth. So what, to this puzzle, you said vents, hydrogen, wet. So chemically, what is the potion here? How important is oxygen? You wrote a book about this.
Yeah, and I actually just came straight here from a conference where I was chairing a session on whether oxygen matters or not in the history of life. Of course, it matters, but it matters most at the origin of life to be not there. As I see it, we have this. I mean, life is made of carbon, basically, primarily organic molecules with carbon-carbon bonds, and the building block, the Lego brick that we take out of the air or take out of the oceans is carbon dioxide. And to turn carbon dioxide into organic molecules, we need to strap on hydrogen. And so we need and this is basically what life is doing. It's hydrogenating carbon dioxide. It's taking the hydrogen that bubbles out of the earth in these hydrothermal vents and it sticks it on CO2. And it's kind of really as simple as that. And actually, thermodynamically, there's the thing that I find most troubling is that if you do these experiments in the lab, the molecules you get are exactly the molecules that we see at the heart of biochemistry, in the heart of life.
Is there something to be said about the earliest origins of that little potion, that chemical process? What really is the spark there?
There isn't a spark. There is a continuous chemical reaction. And there is kind of a spark, but it's a continuous electrical charge which helps drive that reaction.
So literally spark.
Well, the charge at least, but yes. I mean, a spark in that sense is, we tend to think of in terms of Frankenstein. We tend to think in terms of electricity, and one moment you zap something and it comes alive. And what does that really mean? It's come alive, and now what's sustaining it? Well, we are sustained by oxygen, by this continuous chemical reaction. And if you put a plastic bag on your head, then you've got a minute or something before it's all over.
So it's some way of being able to leverage a source of energy.
Well, the source of energy at the origin of life is the reaction between carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And amazingly, most of these reactions are exergonic, which is to say they release energy. If you have hydrogen and CO2 and you put them together in a Falcon tube and you warm it up to, say, 50 degrees centigrade and you put in a couple of catalysts and you shake it, nothing's going to happen. But thermodynamically, that is less stable. Two gases, hydrogen and CO2, is less stable than cells. What should happen is you get cells coming out. So why doesn't that happen is because of the kinetic barriers. It's because that's where you need the spark.
Is it possible that life originated multiple times on Earth? The way you describe it, you make it sound so easy.
There's a long distance to go from the first bits of prebiotic chemistry to, say, molecular machines like ribosomes.
Is that the first thing that you would say is life? Like if I introduce you to the two of you at a party, you would say that's a living thing?
I would say as soon as we introduce genes, information, into systems that are growing anyway, so I would talk about growing protocells. As soon as we introduce even random bits of information into there, I'm thinking about RNA molecules, for example. It doesn't have to have any information in it. It can be a completely random sequence. But if it's introduced into a system which is in any case growing and doubling itself and reproducing itself, then any changes in that sequence that allow it to do so better or worse are now selected by perfectly normal natural selection.
But it's a system.
So that's when it becomes alive, to my mind.
That's encompassed into like an object that keeps information and evolves that information over time, or changes that information over time.
Yes, exactly.
In response to the
So it's always part of a cell system from the very beginning.
So is your sense that it started only once because it's difficult, or is it possible it started in multiple locations on Earth?
It's possible it started multiple occasions. There's two provisos to that. One of them is oxygen makes it impossible, really, for life to start. So as soon as we've got oxygen in the atmosphere, then life isn't going to keep starting over. So I often get asked by people, why can't we have life starting? If it's so easy, why can't life start in these vents now? And the answer is, if you want hydrogen to react with CO2 and there's oxygen there, hydrogen reacts with oxygen instead. It's just, you get an explosive reaction that way. It's rocket fuel. So it's never going to happen. But the other, for the origin of life earlier than that, all we know is that there's a single common ancestor for all of life. There could have been multiple origins and they all just disappeared. But there's a very interesting deep split in life between bacteria and what are called archaea, which look just the same as bacteria. And they're not quite as diverse, but nearly. And they are very different in their biochemistry. And so any explanation for the origin of life has to account as well for why they're so different and yet so similar. And that makes me think that life probably did arise only once.
Can you describe the difference that's interesting there? Well, how they're similar, how they're different?
Well, they're different in their membranes primarily. They're different in things like DNA replication. They use completely different enzymes and the genes behind it for replicating DNA.
So they both have membranes, both have DNA replication.
Yes.
The process of that is different.
They both have DNA. The genetic code is identical in them both. The way in which it's transcribed into RNA, into the copy of a gene, and the way that that's then translated into a protein, that's all basically the same in both these groups. So they clearly share a common ancestor. It's just that they're different in fundamental ways as well. And if you think about, what kind of processes could drive that divergence very early on, I can think about it in terms of membranes, in terms of the electrical charges on membranes. And it's that makes me think that there were probably many unsuccessful attempts and only one really successful attempt.
Can you explain why that divergence makes you think there's one common ancestor? Okay, can you describe that intuition? I'm a little bit unclear about why the leap from the divergence means there's one. Do you mean like the divergence indicates that there was a big invention at that time?
Yes,
from one source?
If you'd got, as I imagine it, you have a common ancestor living in a hydrothermal vent. Let's say there are millions of vents and millions of potential common ancestors living in all of those vents, but only one of them makes it out first. then you could imagine that cell is then going to kind of take over the world and wipe out everything else. And so what you would see would be a single common ancestor for all of life, but with, lots of different vent systems all kind of vying to create the first life forms, you might say.
So this thing is a cell, a single cell
Well,
organism.
we're always talking about populations of cells, but yes, these are single-celled organisms.
But the fundamental life form is a single cell, right? So so they're always together, but they're alone together.
Yeah.
There's a machinery in each one individual component that, if left by itself, would still work, right?
Yes. It's the unit of selection is a single cell. But selection operates over generations and changes over generations in populations of cells. So it would be impossible to say that a cell is the unit of selection in the sense that unless you have a population, you can't evolve, you can't change.
Right. But there was one Chuck Norris, it's an American reference, cell that made it out of the vents, right? Or like the first one.
So imagine then that there's one cell gets out and it takes over the world.
It gets out in the water. It's like floating around.
We're deep in the ocean somewhere.
Yeah.
But actually, two cells got out. And they appear to have got out from the same vent because they both share the same code and everything else. So unless we've got a million different common ancestors in all these different vents. So either they all have the same code and two cells spontaneously emerge from different places, or two different cells, fundamentally different cells, came from the same place. So either way, what are the constraints that say not just one came out or not 500,000 came out, but two came out? That's kind of a bit strange. So how did they come out? Well, they come out because what you're doing inside a vent is you're relying on the electrical charges down there to power this reaction between hydrogen and CO2 to make yourself grow. And when you leave the vent, you've got to do that yourself. You've got to power up your own membrane. And so the question is, well, how do you power up your own membrane? And the answer is, well, you need to pump. You need to pump ions to give an electrical charge on the membrane. So what do the pumps look like? Well, the pumps look different in these two groups. It's as if they both emerge from a common ancestor. And as soon as you've got that ancestor, things move very quickly and divergently. Why does the DNA replication look different? Well, it's joined to the membrane. The membranes are different. The DNA replication is different because it's joined to a different kind of membrane. So there's interesting, this is detail, you may say, but it's also fundamental because it's about the two big divergent groups of life on Earth that seem to have diverged really early on.
It all started from one organism, and then that organism just started replicating the heck out of itself with some mutation on the DNA. So like there's a competition through the process of evolution. They're not like trying to beat each other up. They're just trying to live life.
They're just replicators.
Yeah. Well, let's not minimize their.
Yeah.
They're just trying to chill. They're trying to relax up in there's no sense of trying to survive. They're replicating.
I mean, there's no sense in which they're trying to do anything. They're just a kind of an outgrowth of the Earth, you might say.
Of course, the aliens would describe us humans in that same way.
They might be right.
This primitive life. It's just ants that are hairless, mostly hairless.
Overgrown ants.
Overgrown ants.